Hey, this is Jonathan Gilliam. I'm about to start the show, and I just want to make sure that you know about my best-selling book, Sheep No More, The Art of Awareness and Attack Survival. I want you to ask yourself something. Have you ever thought about what your vulnerabilities are in every sector of your life? I know life has been turned upside down since COVID-19 and all this political stuff that's been occurring, but even more so now, you should be asking yourself, as your life continues to change, where are you most vulnerable? What avenues of approach is someone most likely to take in order to attack you? Who would do that attack? Why would they carry that out? What's their motivation? Where it would happen, when it would happen, and what avenue of approach they would take? All of that is something that you should be asking yourself. And if you read Sheep No More, The Art of Awareness and Attack Survival, you will understand how these attackers think. Go get it wherever books are sold, and let's start the show.
The truth has arrived.
My name is Jonathan Gilliam, and this is The Experts. And welcome back to the show. It is Wednesday, and I wanted, this is going to be one of those shows. It's not going to be extremely long, and I don't know if you've noticed this, but I've been doing less shows. I was trying to pump them out every day. I tried this before when I was doing my YouTube and Facebook Live and Twitter show, when I was doing actually a video show, which I've thought about doing that again, but I don't know. Right now I'm keeping it at the podcast level, but doing a show every day, unless there's just a lot of news, it kind of cheapens it a little bit. But the reality is, as I've said in the past few podcasts, really in season 2, we're already in season 2. That's what's crazy about this, is that I have to feel out what's occurring in this nation and what happens politically. And we know what's happening on social media. If you say the wrong thing, you're canceled. You're absolutely canceled. On YouTube, literally, I kid you not, on YouTube, they have demonetized some of my shows, and then they say that a human has reviewed the shows, and in certain cases, saying that I use the N-word or the C-word or that violence was shown. It's not even a video. When it's on YouTube, it's literally just a picture, and it's got the little squiggly sound waves that go when I talk. There's no pictures on there. I never in my life have ever used the N-word or the C-word or any of these type of derogatory terms, but that's what they put on there. And they didn't put that for everybody to see, but that's what they write me. And they say, this is why you've been demonetized. Even when I've been on Newsmax and I've put those hits, they send me the link to it. I copy it and then put it on YouTube. They have blocked those from monetization, saying that they show violence and things, because I've been talking about January 6th and what happened at the Capitol building. Absolutely ridiculous. And that's the concern. That's a concern. I bring this up almost every show since January 6th, is that the concern is, do I have to tiptoe around? I don't know if Libsyn, who carries this podcast and distributes it for me, who knows if they're going to pull it down? Who knows? It doesn't really matter what you say. It's if you say something that the left feels is a threat, they'll cancel you. And so as I've been looking at the news, and I'm going to do a show. This show today, and I'm going to do a show on Friday as a follow-up to this show. I'm going to talk about this Time article that they had. It was on, let's see, when was this? It was last week sometime, February 4th. And I'm going to discuss this article and some other things that have come up that kind of reflect who these people are, what they're doing. And I've talked about this before, the family tree of deception, the great family tree of deception. In fact, that was my first podcast that I did when I started this series of the podcast. In episode 1, I talked about the family tree, the great family tree of deception in DC. We call it a swamp. It's not really a swamp. It's really it is a deep state, but it's, as we can see now, it's not really that deep. And so from there to now, I've talked about it several times, and it never ceases to amaze me how they expose themselves over and over and over. So that's when I'm going to go into the beginnings of this article that was written in Time Magazine. If you have not read this article, I have it on Facebook and on Twitter. You need to go check it out, because it is like a confession letter that you would see from a criminal, or, somebody who is proud, like a psychopath who's proud of what they've done, a serial killer. They'll confess, and serial killers are really bad about this. They will confess to the crimes, but not all the crimes, and they won't tell you everything so that they can continue to play the game. It makes their life exciting, because they know they have something that they can hold over on the authorities and on the world and on the families. They are still playing that game, and that's kind of what this is like. It's a glimpse into the reality of what happened. They try to make it sound like this is everything that happened and how they were able to do what they did. The left, I'm talking about, over the past year, but there's a little bit more than what it's than what it's leading to, or than what it's stating, just like a serial killer. So I really am trying to, in this podcast, one of the things I'm trying to do, as I've said before, is to not just give my opinion on stuff. I mean, that it's called the experts, right? So I do seek out, sometimes I have guests on here, but I seek out people who are in the know, people who know more than I do in certain areas. I've never claimed to know everything about everything. In fact, like Socrates said, I know that I do not know. And that's what opens my mind to the ability to understand different things that I've never experienced before. And taking my experience where I've gone out on, these crazy career goals of mine and done these different things that have opened my mind to see reality and to see the truth. I mean, you can't lie to a person when they're on the edge of death. You can lie to them, but it's not really going to matter. Priorities, when you're freezing and starving and you're committed to serving the nation and God, you are going to be in a place where priorities kind of fall into line. I always reflect on this. If you have ever ridden a scary ride, like a roller coaster or something that just scared you really bad, or if you almost had a car crash, or you did have a car crash or something like that, or somebody dies in your family, or you had a pet that died, your priorities fall quickly into line when that occurs. And things that seemed important yesterday don't seem as important right now when those things happen. And that is where we need to be right now in our minds, so that our priorities are correct. And over the time that we've been going through this COVID nonsense, and this just, and listen, when I say COVID nonsense, here's what most people aren't saying, okay? The virus is real. I think I don't know how it occurred. I don't know how it came about. I had it in April. The virus is real. But what has killed, I would venture to say, more people than anything, has been the mismanagement of COVID. It's been the complete use of a virus for a political aim. Even it would be the same as terrorism, right? Where a terrorist has a political aim, right? They want to change this in a country, whether it be an overthrow or religious supremacy, whatever. And they go out with that political aim in mind, and they use force, intimidation, and violence for that political aim. Imagine, though, if the force and the intimidation and the violence was already handed out there that the terrorists just had to guide that, right? They didn't have to actually go out and do something. It was already there. It was already being done. So they just step up and guide that because they're in a position to guide it. That's basically what has happened with COVID, is that COVID came about, it exists, but the politicians have used that to basically completely cripple not only this nation, but the world, and faster than could ever have been possible before, push their idea of how the world should live and this fake outrage and more division than they do any type of healing. I don't know if you've noticed this, but there's no healing of racism in the country. In fact, we were healing years and years ago. We were moving towards, you're never going to end racism. You're never going to change what people feel in the heart. In fact, if you push them harder, they could become more hateful, more violent, and more racist. That's just the way it goes. You can't force somebody to do things, to feel a certain way. You can force them to do certain actions, like don't do this or wear a mask, and you can pass laws where they'll get in trouble, and they'll do it, but they're still going to hate you. They're still going to hate that law. So we were moving towards people actually learning and understanding each other and growing as a people. And then over the past, really like 20 years or 30, well, it'd be more than 20 years, really about since Bush 41, it started to go down. And then the Clinton era, I mean, I don't know if Clinton really, he did divide, but he wasn't as divisive as even Bush 41. And then 9/11 occurred. Everybody was cool. Things were starting to look good. And then as soon as Tom Daschle, I remember Tom Daschle going in front of Congress and started playing politics, and it just got worse and worse, and it got really bad really fast and never came back. It just kept spiraling downwards from that point forward. The Bush presidency failed. Obama came in, a failure for 8 years, and he divided the country more than it had ever been divided before. Trump came in an already divided nation, and because he stood his ground against the left and against the establishment, they literally, over the past 4 years, wasn't Trump. It was the media. It was the establishment politicians. It was that family tree of the D.C. underworld that really has roots all over the nation and really all over the world. That is what divided us more than anything. And they just made it up as they went along. They scripted it. It was as if it was a reality TV show being scripted as they go along. I don't know if you know this, but I've talked to people who've been on these reality TV shows. I've met a lot of these people being in media, and again, I hear that this is the way it occurs. Let's say that, they're one of these Alaska shows. They love Alaska for some strange reason, and fake hillbillies. And let's say that it's a fake hillbilly Alaska show, and there's no show. I mean, they don't really know what to do it about. Maybe they have a business, or maybe they're a gold miner or whatever. And then a tree falls down in the road and blocks them from getting where they need to be. They will literally take that incident and write an entire story, a fake story, around a real incident. And that's the way these reality TV shows are created. The past, really, since the Obama administration, we could probably say that even the Bush administration, it really has really taken hold. That's the way things work, right? Something occurs, or they want to make something, they take some incident and then they literally script it out, and it gets pushed out in media and social media and politics and all around and throughout the nation. It just gets pushed out. And so then that lie becomes reality, just like when people watch the Kardashians or any of these other reality shows and they think it's real. The best of these real estate shows where they have, these people, they're thinking about buying a house here and they're going to have a vacation house there. And they go and they visit all these different homes. Those people are all realtors, or they're just actors, or they're just people who signed up to be on the show. It's not like they're really buying a house. And it's so fake. You can see it, you can feel it. Well, I feel the same way about the way this nation is going. It's just been scripted and then pushed out, and then that's just the way it goes. Because it doesn't really matter what reality is. They're going to make it seem as though that's the way it's going. So as we've gotten to this point in this nation, and we look back on the way things have occurred, this article that was written in Time Magazine, it just laid it out perfectly. But before I get to that article, the thing that is really, really interesting about one thing that I saw, and again, I scour all these different headlines, and this, of all places, was on MSN. And that the headline reads, "Woke American ideas are threat," French leader says. So the French leader is saying that these American woke ideas that are happening, basically, it's not really starting in college. That's where it's like those are the young people, the ones who progress it, right? These progressive ideas. But Macron, he said and was quoted as saying that certain social science theories entirely imported from the are entirely imported from the United States, and he feels as though they're a threat to his nation. And when you read through this story and what they're talking about, and many in France are talking about, is exactly what's destroying this nation. And anytime somebody disagrees with what the left says, they are branded as far right, right? So Macron is now they're saying that he's a far right, person, and that he believes, because he believes this, he's far right. So I'm trying to see here as I scroll down what it was when they were naming this stuff. Okay, here it is. So these are the things that they say are hurting France. Okay, now this is France saying this, right? Many of the leaders in France say that this is what is very troubling to their nation, and it's directly coming from the United States. Mass protests, systemic racism, or the illusion of systemic racism, the Me Too generation. They feel what we have seen over here with that whole Me Too movement, and the reality of how some people who did suffer and some people who have been victimized and rightfully should be recognized have been really overshadowed by complete liars as far as politics go. Like when Trump was trying to get somebody from the Supreme Court added, or whatever it was, when they were trying to get somebody confirmed. Every single time you knew it was going to happen. Somebody was going to come out, and the stories that they tell were just like total hearsay. No proof whatsoever. And they would just parade these people through. And it overtook and really just devolve the Me Too movement into something that was just a political way for people to make waves. They see that. And the other thing that they were talking about is the let's see, where is it? Ideological excess, right? At universities. So it's just very interesting how the leaders in France are saying this, when we think of France as so liberal and so leftist, that they're actually saying that a lot of the problems that they're seeing in France are due to the woke culture in the United States. I find that very interesting. Now, I just want to go over, remember, I'm going to do another, because I really want to go through this and study. I've read through this thing several times. I'm developing a picture in my head as to what the left says that they did. The headline for this Time article is "The Secret History of the Shadow Campaign That Saved the 2020 Election." Now, again, as what I was talking about before, this reads like a confession letter that a serial killer would write, but they're not going to give you all the proof. They're not going to give you all the answers to what they did. They're just going to make themselves look good so they can continue to play the game. And a lot of people, a lot of criminals who do bad things love to brag about it. That's why they keep mementos of what they've done. Like either they're a tough guy because they defeated this other gang member, or they're a serial killer and they want to keep a trophy, or whatever. This is the way that criminals get caught, is that they feel the need to tell everybody, or to tell some people, about what they did and brag about it, as though you were talking about, you might be talking about your 5-year-old child that did something great at school, and you're going to brag and tell everybody about it. Criminals are notorious, or psychopaths, narcissists are notorious for talking about things that they've done, because it makes them feel good. It gives them energy. It makes them feel powerful. I remember when I was an FBI agent, as soon as people would find out that I was in the FBI, inevitably somebody would come up and would literally tell me something that they did wrong. Weirdest thing. The weirdest thing happened all the time. They'd say, it's funny. I did this and I did this, but, it's no big deal. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, why would you tell me that? So that's what this is like. That's what this article is like. The secret history of the shadow campaign that saved the 2020 election. Now, throughout this whole story, there's one guy in particular, Mike Podhorzer, I think is how you say his name. I may be crucifying that name, but I think that's who it is. And he is the political director of the AFL-CIO, okay, the largest federation of unions in the United States. Now, as the story goes, as they start laying this out, that a lot of things were going on. See, they're saying, let me just say this first. They're saying in this story that all this came about over the past year in 2020, starting in January, around that of 2020, and actually around April, that this kind of started to come out. This plan started to come up. I think that's a fabrication. I think that these people were working towards something, and I think that what we're seeing over the past year is a result of what they had been working towards. That's what I feel. So it's not like they're trying to make it sound like everything that happened last year that succeeded for the left was just spontaneous, right? I always find it, if I want to prove something or show somebody an example, or if I want to, let me see, how can I say this? If I want you to understand something, I'm going to give you an example. That's what I'm trying to say. So a good example of spontaneity in mass, when people are angry about something and they want to fix something, all you have to do is look at the conservatives over the past 4 years. Look at how Trump got, he really, one thing he did really well in the positive side is that he really did get a lot of people unified. There, I would say before Trump, rallies weren't big for Republicans or conservatives in general. People didn't show up and stand together. They weren't really, you didn't see people for 4 years of Bush 43 wearing Bush hats. You didn't see that, or T-shirts or Bush flags. You saw it with Trump. Trump was, his celebrity carried him in the way that, in the things that he was saying. The reason why he got elected was because more than half the country understood what he was saying, and that's why he got elected. He just was harsh in the way he said it. But that's one thing that he did really well. But the American people that are conservative, by and large, aren't good at protesting. They're not really even good at rallying. They're not good at coming together and having dialogue. I've been screaming that since 2014. I saw it immediately when I got out of the FBI. One of the biggest things I saw was that the nation on the conservative side doesn't really communicate with each other. They would rather argue with each other than communicate. And their ability to disseminate information, truthful information, because of social media has just taken a complete downward spiral, where you may have the truth, But if you don't have a stage, it's not really going to get out there. But who does get stuff out there is all these social media know-it-alls and people who will tell you whatever they need to tell you in order to make a buck or to get popularity. They spin these lies and these conspiracy theories up, and people follow it, right? So the reason I'm telling you all this is that the way the story is written is though over the past year, spontaneously, all these things just fell into line, right? I'm not buying it because maybe some of it did. Maybe they came up with ideas and they moved and they flexed and they were able to, kind of bob and weave and make their way through 2020 to get to a point where they were really unified. But see, that's the thing. The left has been unified we could go all the way back to the 60s and even before that. I would really say the 40s probably is where the unification of the left really started. The infiltration of the left started before that, but really after World War II, that's where the left started to grow. And one of the reasons why I believe that is that the people who were involved, who grew up during the World War II and the Depression era, once they had children and the Depression was over and World War II was over, they came home and they spoiled their children. Now, spoiled in 1940s or 50s is different than spoiled now. I mean, there was still discipline and understanding of authority. However, it was the beginning of that day and age where people got softer on their children. Children became less disciplined. Hollywood became bigger, and with Hollywood came liberal leftist ideas. It's better to be a rebel. Law enforcement is bad and shouldn't be respected. Your parents are square, is what they used to say, and they're out of touch. Whereas before, your parents were respected, your grandparents were respected. That gradually declined more and more, to the point where in the 1960s, as a lot of great things actually came out of the 1960s. And as far as equal rights, we still, before that, things weren't equal. But as equality improved, the spoiling of America, or of the world, of the youth, I can just talk about America, it got worse and worse. And so the 60s, the people who kind of gained that radical power in the 60s were a direct result of starting after World War II, this downfall of raising children, and the Christian church and all these different things just started to be degraded because of the left. And historically, you can see wherever progression starts and the left takes hold in a nation, it's like a virus. It really is. So we get to the 60s, and that generation was really more, it's like it skipped all the way to here. The 70s were still affected. We're still kind of radical, but the 80s and the 90s and 2000, early 2000s, things kind of slowed down a little bit as far as radicalization of the nation. That's because in a lot of ways, people became complacent with that radical thinking because it wasn't really radical anymore, right? People were completely spoiled. Discipline was going completely out of the door. I was probably one of the last generations where paddling was just the way it was in school. So where am I going with all this? All of that leads up to last year, right? All the connections, all the relationships, all the tactics, techniques, and procedures that the left uses, that had been building up to last year, and really over the past, let's say 16 years, right? Through Obama and even through President Trump's tenure, the left was flexing and was working what they do. So when I look at this story and they make it sound like it just happened over the past year, that's not true. So really what it comes down to is this Mike, according to the story, Mike Podhorzer, who is the assistant to the president for the AFL-CIO, and he's basically the political director of the AFL-CIO. He saw what was going on, and he decided to act. This is the way the story says, anyway. So the story lays it out as though this guy, Mike Podhorzer, is the architect of what happened basically over last year that led to the victory of the Democrats. I mean, the clean sweep. They kept the House, won the Senate, and won the presidency. Legally or not, scam or not, fraud or not, they have it. Okay. So let's just, for those of you that are like falling out of your seat because I said that they won, look, they're in there. I mean, to the victor goes the spoils, right? It doesn't matter if you won fraudulently. If you own it all, the chances of the real victor standing up and saying, no, I won is slim to none. And that's basically what's happening. So this guy, it says, was basically, they make it sound like he was just sitting around. But basically, in a nutshell, this is what happened. He worked his sources. Because of the way Zoom is now, Skype, all the social media, we can do things that we've never been able to do before, or at least organized people can do things that they've never been able to do before. So as the story goes, as we go through here and look at how Podhorzer came up with this whole thing and how it started to unfold, the story takes us back to 2016, right? And as I've been saying, it didn't all just happen this past year, although according to the story, that's where it all unfolded. Again, a lot of things were, I'm sure, in place. The connections were already there, but this kind of alludes to that, okay? So it said he began circulating weekly number crunching memos to small circles of allies and hosting strategy sessions in D.C., but when he began to worry about the election itself, he didn't want to seem paranoid. It was only after months of research that he introduced his concerns in his newsletter in October 2019. Okay, so this does go back to 2016, how he had seen what was happening, saw what the potential could be for the next election, and so he had a small group of people. And see, this is the other thing they do. They don't say who this small group of people was, but I'm sure that they are power players, because this guy is, when we look at the AFL-CIO, I mean, this is huge. I mean, their reach is tremendous, and their political strength and the money that they bring in is overwhelming, and their contacts and relationships are, global. So it's not like he was just talking to a couple buddies, right? When he says that he has an inner circle or allies, we're talking about some very strong people. So when he put out this newsletter in 2019, what he found out was that there were other people that were feeling the same exact way. Again, I think this is probably oversimplifying what the actuality of what happened. These forces that exist in the Democrat Party didn't just start feeling a way, hey, I feel this way, you feel this way, let's work this out. Again, their tactics, techniques, and procedures have been honed over years and years, not just in this nation, but in other nations, because that's the thing about progressive lefts, is that they don't just work their stuff over here in this nation, whether it works or fails, and then go away. They continue to compile what works and what doesn't, and they share that as they move, because it's like a wave. It's like a tidal wave. The left and progressivism is like a tidal wave that rolls through any nation. Before it was basically political strength. Now it's just who owns the airwaves, which is basically all over the world. But, okay, so the usual tools of data. This is the story goes on and says the usual tools of data, analytics, and polling would not be sufficient in a situation where the president himself was trying to disrupt the election, he wrote. This is talking about President Trump. Most of our planning takes us through election day, he noted, but we are not prepared for the two most likely outcomes. This is very telling to me, okay? Time is reporting that this is what he said in his newsletter. And those outcomes would be Trump losing and refusing to concede, and Trump winning the election or the electoral college despite losing the popular vote by corrupting the voting process in key states. Now, this is a reality. They knew that if they worked and stole the election, and when I say stole, when they manipulated the voting process in some way, shape, or form, that the president in the position that he was in was not going to be like 2016. He was going to be in a position to see the reality of what happened. And that's exactly what occurred. And they knew that because of the position he was in, he would be able to, or he would then sit back and say, I'm not going to concede the election. Because if he can see where the potential fraud was, then why would he concede? They knew that was going to occur. Just like this reminds me of somebody I met once that made a certain product, and it was the biggest patent infringement lawsuit in the history of the United States. This guy, if you used to fly on airplanes, back when we used to fly on airplanes, and they had Sky Mall, and there was a rope ladder that you could buy. And if something happened and you lived in a second story, or you had a 2-story house, you could throw the rope ladder out, and had a way to mount it in the floor and stuff. You could throw that out and climb out. And this guy invented it. He built the whole little company himself. He had the box that it came in. It had a picture of his niece on it, and climbing out the window. If you remember looking at this in Sky Mall, it was all there. Well, Kitty, I think, is the name of the ladder. They make ladders and fire extinguishers and all these things. When they saw that on the market and they knew it was a good product, they ripped it off. They ripped it off. And one of his friends came to him one day and said, "Oh, I didn't know that you sold your company or licensed other people to make it." And he said, "I didn't." And they said, "Well, you need to go check this out because it says their name, Kitty, on I think that's the way you say it, on the box." And he went and looked in the box. They didn't even try to reprint the box, right? They used the same pictures and everything. They just put their name on it. And so he sued them. What was interesting, though, is that in the lawsuit, it came out in discovery that they had planned to be sued, but they knew that this product was spectacular, so that what they would do is flood the market with their name on it, and then when they got sued, they would pay him out the normal cost of a patent infringement lawsuit, and then they would continue to own the licensing or whatever and make this thing and make millions off of it. So the same way that they had planned and budgeted to be sued is exactly what the left did here. They planned on committing voter fraud in some way, shape, or form, and they knew the outcome. They knew that Trump would see this because of his position now and that he wouldn't concede the election. They knew that. And so they planned for it. By the way, in that lawsuit, he did end up winning it, and he did end up licensing it to Kitty to make the ladder. Now, it worked out in the way of, yes, they got the license to make it, but they had to pay a lot more than they had anticipated. But through appeals and so on and so forth, he got some money, but they still got to license it. And I think when you license, you make 7 to 12% off of everything that's sold. What total scam? But that's what you see here. Okay. So he uses these key words, and this was quoted. It says that we desperately need to systematically red team this election so that we can anticipate and plan for the worst we know will be coming our way. And as it turned out, as the article said, Podhorzer wasn't the only one thinking of these terms. He began to hear from others eager to join the fight. And what an interesting group this alliance is. He drafted a 3-page confidential memo titled Threats to the 2020 Election. This is what they're saying. Trump has made it clear that this will not be a fair election and that he will reject anything but his own re-election as faked and rigged, he wrote. Well, the writing was on the wall, right? It was on the wall. And anybody that, as soon as COVID broke out and they said mail-in voting, we knew that it was going to be rigged, right? Even, I'm trying to think of who this was. Somebody was just telling me about this the other day. It was right on the tip of my tongue. Oh, it was Bezos from Amazon. Railed against mail-in voter for, I believe it was their unions is what it was, because he said it would be ripe with fraud. But he was okay with it happening in the United States for the presidential or for the elections in 2020. That's the way these people are, okay? So, I want to briefly go over this, and then I'll go into more detail on Friday. But everything that they assumed would happen, or that they projected, just like in my book, Sheep No More, The Art of Awareness and Attack Survival, I show you how attackers look at you so that you can reverse engineer where you could be attacked, who would attack you, when it would happen, where it would happen, how it would be carried out, and the avenue of approach. You can figure all that out. They're not rocket scientists. Well, politics is not rocket science either. If you know about how people behave, and they know more now than ever before because of social media and because of how the leftist Silicon Valley social media platforms have come up with all these different programs to monitor how you are, who you are, what you do, how we do it as a people, or as a nation, or nations. All that has changed the way that they see things, so they can predictively go through and analyze the behaviors and predict what's going to occur. So then COVID-19 erupted, and what a timely thing that was, right? Just happened to occur at this particular time when they were planning for all these very particular things. And COVID kind of came out of nowhere. So that pushed them ever forward. And I'm trying to see here where the people that were made up of this alliance, okay? It is, when I find it here, where was it here? It was, here it is, okay. So they kept holding back-to-back Zoom meetings for hours a day with his network and contacts from across the progressive universe. Now, this is the alliance. Listen to this group of people, okay? The labor movement, okay? Far left. You have the overall institutional left, like Planned Parenthood. Greenpeace was involved in this. Resistance groups, I love the way they call them this, resistance groups, like Invisible and Move On. Progressive data geeks and strategists, representatives of donors and foundations, state-level grassroots organizers, racial justice activists, and others. Now, in all the times I've been talking to you about this family tree, this deceptive family tree that's called this, we call it the swamp in D.C., and how the roots are all over the place, this is a big portion of that family tree. We think of the DOJ, for instance, or the Democrat Party, or establishment Republicans. We think about political appointees and senior executive service members. We think of that as a swamp, or lobbyists, for instance. But the reality is that is only part. George Soros, everybody talks about George Soros, how he funds this and funds that. George Soros is just one of many big money people. But when you look at this, what they're not showing here in this group that I can 100% guarantee you was in here is all the social media companies, representatives from that. You probably had members of the media, the mainstream news media, because they all played a part in this. But look at these others, the labor movement. Think of the millions of people that are involved with that. Planned Parenthood. Oh, that's the most evil group that there is out there. Greenpeace, literally Greenpeace, and many of the people that are in Greenpeace are the same people that are in Antifa, at the top of Antifa, or the Earth Liberation Group, or the Animal Liberation Group. They're all the same people. The resistance groups, I call them invisible. It's indivisible, right? And Move On. These two groups, very far left, quote unquote, resistance groups. But I think probably the most dangerous are these progressive data geeks and strategists, the people who collect this information, part of Silicon Valley, many of them, and they have learned to use this data against us, or against it, really to further whatever political aim. What I've just pointed out to you there are basically terrorists. They're involved in mass murder. I mean, Planned Parenthood is the biggest mass murder gimmick. I don't want to call it a gimmick, scam ever in the history of mankind. And then the state level grassroots organizers, they're the same people, these grassroots organizers are the same people who have organized protests and riots throughout 2020 and before then. Yet they call, the Proud Boys a terrorist group. Canada actually declared the Proud Boys as a terrorist group. They've never done anything terroristic ever. In fact, the reason they exist is to drink and fight with Antifa. Unbelievable. But in there also, they talk about donors and foundations. These foundations are made, so you have donors, specific people, very rich, like George Soros, and then you have foundations that are made up of huge money people, and they donate millions and millions and hundreds of millions of dollars. Okay, so there's different subtitles in here that we go through, or different categories they talk about. Securing the vote. All right. Basically what I'll say here, and they'll talk more about it on Friday, is that they wanted to set out to overhaul America's bulky election infrastructure. That's what they call it. And the pandemic was perfect for that. They could overhaul it, as they call it, by just making mail-in voter. I guarantee what's coming next is going to be all electronic voting. It's coming, folks. Unless 70 million people stop it, it's coming. The next category was the disinformation defense, right? And they're talking. So this is what's interesting, and I'm going to get into this again more on Friday, is they talk about bad actors spreading false information is nothing new. I'm reading this directly from the article. For decades, campaigns have grappled with everything from anonymous calls claiming the elections have been rescheduled to flyers spreading nasty smears about candidates and families. That's been going on forever. But Trump's lies and conspiracy theories, the viral force of social media, and the involvement of foreign meddlers made disinformation a broader, deeper threat to the 2020 vote. Now, everything that they just said basically is a confession. That is them. That is how the left does things. They lie. They spread conspiracy theories. All these people who follow QAnon, 100% guarantee you, I don't know what the percentage of, but probably a lot of the stuff that was put out there and instigated and got people goaded into believing this crap was done by the left. Guarantee it. Guarantee it. That's what they do. They spread conspiracy theories, but they do it to the right. The viral force of social media. Who owns social media? The left. That's who spreads more of the viral force of social media is the left. It's not the right. And the involvement of foreign meddlers. Come on now. Come on, man. As Joe Biden would say. The reality is Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, the entire left, many of the establishment people in the Republican Party who don't want it to change are so well connected and well funded by foreign entities. I mean, they basically are agents for foreign governments. So this is another thing that they do. They will accuse the right of doing things that they themselves are doing. I really don't think there's a right. I think it's just there's the left or the leftists, and then there's the Constitution, and then there's just people who just want to live, and everybody else. And the left is growing bigger and bigger and more powerful all the time because they have they've done a really good job of getting themselves into these positions. Then they spread the word, and this is where they really excel, right? This is the other sub-headline, spreading the word. They are incredible at spreading the word because they own the megaphone. They own social media and Silicon Valley, and they own every mainstream media company except for Newsmax and One American News. I mean, Fox News, give me a break. Fox News is fake right. So they're not the like liberal light. They're just fake right. They're liberals. There's nothing light about the way Fox News is ran. People power. So this is another subcategory. So people power subtitle. Mustering up energy. Now, both sides do this quite well. I don't think that the right realized how good they were at doing this. Now we can reflect back on 2020 and all the stuff that Trump did, and we're actually pretty good at mustering up the people. The problem is guiding the people. There was no guidance over the past 4 years. There was no guidance to anybody. There was nobody telling people to, how to organize, how to protest, how to, insist and stop, whatever it is, the city from functioning until they enact voter registration and voter IDs. Nobody was guiding them to do that. So it didn't get done. Or to insist on paper ballots and hand counting. They didn't do any of that on the right. The left does those things, and they get what they want because of what's weird is they want to take the power away from the people. I mean, they want to degrade the Constitution and crush your Second Amendment, totally hamstring your First Amendment. But at the same time, the way that they are able to muster people or robots, the useful idiots, is unbelievable the way that the left can do it. They don't just get people to get riled up. They actually get them to act. Unfortunately, when the right acts, they get vilified. They get called terrorists. You can call the left terrorists all you want, but they're not going to print it. So, as we've always said, if it's to the victor goes the spoils. So, one of the more troubling things about this is that the Chamber of Commerce, the United States Chamber of Commerce, joined in on this and joined in with the AFL-CIO. Very troubling because the Chamber of Commerce has predominantly been conservative or Republican, and now they join together in with the AFL-CIO, which has always been left. It's really just a communist front. Here's the interesting thing. I've been saying this for years, that under the Obama administration, there were more leftist CEOs than I ever remember being put into place and growing in these big mega corporations, not just in the United States, but around the world. The upper echelon of most big companies in the United States and around the world became left. That's why in 2020, everything just went, completely to crap. That's why, you get people at American Airlines competing for certain jobs, and even though they may be Latin or some other minority, they're not going to get the job because they're not black. Why? Because those at the top of American Airlines are far left, and they've taken this woke mentality to an extreme where now they're actually saying you're not minority enough. You have to be this minority. So exactly what we're seeing here, this unholy alliance between the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO, is the same thing that we see with the progressive left and all these companies where the people at the top are leftists. Same thing with all the federal agencies in Washington, D.C., and really your state and local agencies the same way. Okay, so there's a couple other I don't know if they're really chapters, but they're sub-headlines in this article. And I'm going to go through those on Friday, but I'm going to go through the whole thing again in a little bit more detail on Friday. But this is what I want you to understand as I've gone through this today, okay? How organized the left is, right? This didn't just happen last year. All these relationships, all this communication, the ability to communicate, the technology that was involved with this, the echo chambers, and the way that they're able to unify and move forward, all of that has been moving since the 40s at least, probably even before that, but is a direct result of the 40s into the 50s, and definitely the people that were involved in the 60s, and how they hone their skills and then pass those along as technology advanced. This is all a direct result of that. And you see now how entrenched this leftist ideology is in the United States. So again, we'll go back to the beginning of when I started this podcast, how the leaders in France are all in a tizzy because they say what's occurring in France is a direct result of this progressive woke mentality in the United States. And yeah, you're exactly right. But it's not just because of the United States. What France and these leaders in France need to realize is that they are enablers. And they are one of the reasons why it has gotten so strong here in the United States. Because the people that are establishment all around the world, not just in the United States. That's reality. One little quick story, okay? I'm not going to say where it was, and I'm not going to say what agency it was with. But I got a report, or actually not a report. I got somebody called me and told me about what occurred. They were with one of the agencies working the inauguration in Washington, D.C. And they went into the break room and were going to get some coffee, and in came two female agents. And they were talking about the election that had occurred, and that was CNN was everywhere on every television. And as they were talking about the election, this one individual who happens to be a Trump supporter said that, because they were just talking about the craziness of the election and how crazy the inauguration was going to be and so on and so forth. And so this individual stated that, yeah, it is crazy. It was crazy how it was stolen. And there's no way that 80 million people voted for Joe Biden. There's just no way. It was crazy. He was just having a conversation, he thought, with these two women who came in there. They both looked at him as though he had grown a third eye in his forehead, and they walked out of the room. And within probably 10 minutes, this individual got called into the office, and there was a complaint filed because these females felt as though this individual was making them uncomfortable and threatening them in a threatening manner. And so this person who was temporary duty to that office was removed from that office and put into another office about an hour away until the inauguration was over, and then was sent back to their main office. That's how ridiculous things have gotten here. That is a perfect example of how far-reaching the progressive mentality has gotten even in our own agencies. Yes, that was a law enforcement agency in the United States during the inauguration. You know, reflecting on 2020 and the way that the progressive left was able to succeed, not win, don't get yourself into a tizzy, but succeed in basically overthrowing the United States government to a complete socialist left. The way that occurred was not spontaneous. It was a direct result of literally 50 or more years of relationship building, of communication, of tactics, techniques, and procedures being honed by the left. Unholy as it is, if the right was that effective, we wouldn't have anything to worry about. I'm Jonathan Gilliam. This is The Experts. The truth has arrived. Peace, and I'm out of here.